Hello and welcome everyone. It's so nice to be back here again with all of you after being having a break last week. I hope everyone's feeling well. How are you feeling, Simone?
I am feeling well, thank you. I've been enjoying the sunshine that we've been afforded this week. It lifts the mood. So yeah.
Absolutely, and I'm back working from home at the moment, so that I get a much more of a chance to enjoy it than where I was the last couple of months. So that's been really nicely timed for me as well. Fab. So this week we're going to be talking about how to go about choosing a subject to apply to at university. Um, this is going to be we're going to sort of be looking through a few of the nuances, talking a little bit about the success rates for different subjects, and just sort of easing you into some of the ways that we try to work and approach things here at UniAdmissions. Um, I'm joined today by my colleague Simone, who looks after our consulting team. So she is one of the people you could well be speaking to if you get in touch with us after this, to find out how we can help you out. And for those of you who haven't come to all 100 of these or whatever it is we've done now, my name is Matt and I look after our research here at UniAdmissions. So making sure that everything we suggest to you in the upcoming slides and the consultations Simone does online, that all of that stuff is backed up by lovely graphs. We'll be looking at a couple of those later. So in terms of choosing a subject, I think what we will do is we will start with the kind of very basic things to consider that you've probably already thought about. The first thing is that you should be thinking about the subject first of all, rather than the university. Don't decide that you desperately want to go to Oxford only to discover that the course you want isn't there, and then try and sort of force yourself into the wrong subject because of that. You're much better off picking out the subject first. So how should you do that? I would say you should start by thinking about your personal interests, what you're reading about, what you care about, rather than thinking straight from your A-levels. You know, there's only a relatively narrow set of things you can do at A-level, but the diversity of courses available at university is much greater than is offered at A-level. So you want to be figuring out what it is that isn't perhaps a perfect analogy for your A-levels, but is the thing that you really care about. The next thing to think about, and this is perhaps a slightly unusual lesson, is the idea of opportunity cost. For most people, you're only going to go and get one degree. Maybe you'll do a master's as well. But if you're looking at the subjects that you can study at university, if people are in doubt, I always push them towards what is it that you're not going to be able to do later in life. It's quite hard to study chemistry at home. It's dangerous. You can get in trouble with the police if they think you're making a bomb. However, you can do it at university. By contrast, if you want to study history, you can very much do that in your evenings after you finish university. Not so much chemistry. You're going to find that much harder to do as a kind of hobby. So take that sort of thing into account. If you are torn between something that you really love, but you're also thinking of something that you're not going to have the opportunity to do again, then take that into account. But at the same time, you want to remember that, you know, whatever you choose at this point, that isn't forever. You know, plenty of people do a law degree only to discover they don't want to be lawyers. People like our own founder Rohan do a medical degree, but don't end up spending all that much time as doctors. There are all sorts of choices that you can make down the line. You can even change your subject while you're at university, although that can be a little bit tricky. It depends on sort of the course and what you're changing to, and it's not something we're going to worry about this week. So I think really what we're getting at here is the importance of passion. Any degree you do is going to be hard work. It really is a full-time job. So you want to make sure you're going to enjoy it. If it's a full-time job you don't like, you won't do well and you will be unhappy. You know, make sure that you've looked at the entry requirements you've got to think about. Plenty of courses that involve more maths than you might expect. We speak to a lot of students each year who are planning to apply for PPE, only to discover there's a lot more maths involved than they were hoping for. And remember that passion is the thing that's most important when it comes to your application, rather than your ability. Well, obviously the ability is important, but your passion is going to be what they're measuring in the interview, and that's going to be much more important than being good at something but not really caring about it. A subject that you find really easy perhaps isn't going to be the best match, particularly since it's about to get a lot harder. The other thing to say is, for all that you want something that you're really passionate about, be careful about leaning too much on extracurriculars. I've got a lovely little clip coming up from one of the admissions tutors at Cambridge. He's talking here about English, but it goes for any subject. I think this is really useful to remember when thinking about how you put yourself forward in your personal statement, and also how you choose your subject.
So I suppose if you are extremely interested and excited by things that are not related to the subject of English, like sport or music or something like that, that's great. But we're probably not that interested actually in that element of your well-rounded self.
I always like to pull this clip out as a reminder that however good you are at Duke of Edinburgh, however many school plays you've been in, that's all very nice, but that's not what they're interested in. If you apply to study English, they want to know how well you write and how well you read. If you apply to study chemistry, they want to know how well you do chemistry. I don't know anything about chemistry, how well you titrate stuff. But you want to make sure expressing that passion not just through your presentation, the interview, your work, but that you're not you're not expecting to get in on the basis of your sporting prowess, because that's not going to happen. So there are a few other things to consider. As hopefully this has given you a sense of kind of the course area you're going for. There are some things to consider. There's no physics and there's no PPE at Cambridge. At Cambridge, all of your sciences come rolled together as part of what's called natural sciences, which gives you a little bit more of a mix, whereas at Oxford, they're all chopped up. The way that your degree is calculated is different as well. For most subjects at Oxford, it's all about your final year exams. So if you don't do very well in years 1 and 2, you can get away with it. Whereas Cambridge has a much more continuous assessment through part 1 and part 2 of the degree, as they call them. Another thing to bear in mind is that Oxford interviews fewer people for each place than Cambridge. So that might play into your calculus if you're weighing up your options between the two. And the other thing to note is that there are a lot more places for medicine at Cambridge than at Oxford. So if you're not fussed about the two, but you're going for medicine, well, that's what we're going to come to on the next slide, right? Oxford interviews something like 40% of the applicants they get for medicine. And so if you are really confident in your GCSEs and how well you've done on the BMAT, that puts you in a really good position, because you're already going to have eliminated more than half the competition if you're applying for Oxford. Now, Cambridge, they will interview almost everyone who applies for medicine, which means that you're much more likely to get through to that interview. So if you're less confident in the GCSEs and the BMAT, that might be a better spot for you. And it's worth bearing in mind that they do just take more people, simply because it's a bigger medical school, the hospital that you get trained at is bigger, all of those things. There can be subtler differences between subjects as well. For example, English at Cambridge is much more theoretical, or what's called continental in the style of teaching. It's in some respects more modern. It's much closer to what you might have come into contact with sort of casually through critical theory and feminist ideas and race theory, things like this. That's much more emphasized at Cambridge, and there's a lot less emphasis on the language itself, on the grammar, things like that. Whereas if you were to study English at Oxford, you would find that is a more traditional, more historical kind of emphasis, much more emphasis on the history of language, and a little bit closer in design to classics than what's done at Cambridge. Much more interested in kind of the long run of the language. It's much harder to get out of doing Beowulf at Oxford than it is at Cambridge, for example. Now, your choice of degree also has an impact on your chances of getting in, obviously enough. If you go for the most popular degree, which I think at the moment is still PPE or medicine, your chances are, of course, narrower than if you're going for something less popular. The thing to bear in mind is that neither university is really easier to get into. Oxford interview fewer people than Cambridge, so it might feel as though Cambridge is easier to get into because more people get interviewed, but the level of competition per place is almost exactly the same, with a handful of exceptions. There are a few incredibly oversubscribed courses at both universities, but generally speaking, everything falls between 10% of people getting in and about 40% of people, and most everything is around that 20% mark. We do have a lot of really detailed data on this if anyone ever wants to get in touch and talk about it, because no one wants to talk to me about it, and it's my favorite thing. So we've talked already a lot about how you're choosing. One thing I sort of wanted to emphasize finally in this kind of area is how big the differences can be between seemingly similar subjects. Nearly a third of people who apply for chemistry at Oxford are offered a place, but it's only around just over 1 in 8 when it comes to biochemistry. I've no idea why people have gone off chemistry and are so keen on biochemistry these days. But if that's something that, you know, if you're interested in that subject area, that's something that's worth taking into account. Chemistry is, I think, also the only subject at Oxford that still doesn't have an admissions test. So you've got a really good shot at getting an interview and a really good shot at getting a place. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, I'm dreadful at chemistry, so no chance for me there. We also talked a little bit about some of the really hard to get into subjects. Roughly 1 in 8 students who applies gets a place for PPE at Oxford. That number is then almost halved for economics and management, which is by far the most competitive course at Oxford. And we see a similar number for computer science at Cambridge, which has really gone up in popularity over the last few years. Which brings us to something else that's gone up in the last few years. Simone, do you want to talk to us a little bit about A-level and GCSE grades?
Yes, indeed. So the pandemic has had many knock-on effects, and one is that students weren't actually made to sit their GCSEs and A-levels during the pandemic. And this has led to an inflation in the results, which has essentially made it more difficult for universities to work out whether a student is very, very capable or not so capable, or kind of, you know, really at the top end of the cohort or just kind of in the middle. And so what's happening is that the A-levels and the GCSEs, in terms of, you know, their ability to influence the overall outcome of your application, they've kind of lost their credibility, and they've kind of become more of a tick box exercise than actually, if you get these grades, you know, you are definitely going to secure your offer. What is more important at the moment are both the admissions tests and the interviews. So let's talk about that in a bit more detail. In terms of the breakdown, the way that they score your overall application, let's just go through that so you can see all of these wonderful colors on your screen. So the personal statement is 10%. They will obviously, you know, be introduced to you as a candidate through your personal statement, your references, things like this, but it can only account for 10%. Your A-levels and your GCSEs, maybe surprisingly to you, is also 10%, so we're at 20%. The admissions test, there's a significant jump. Now we're talking about 40% of the overall outcome. And then also the interviews account for 40%. So you can see that the admissions test and the interviews really are making up the majority of the sway in terms of how they look at your application. So just really important when you're preparing to apply that balance to the equation. Matt.
Thank you, Simone. That's really helpful. It's worth bearing in mind as well that these things also happen in order. So you'll already have done your GCSEs. You'll probably have got your A-level predictions by the time you apply. You'll be working on the personal statement then, and then you'll be doing the admissions test next. And that really is the part that secures whether or not you get to the interview stage. And what we know is that the relationship between the admissions test score and the chance of getting an interview is unbelievably strong. As you can see here, The black parts of the graph represent students who applied but didn't get an interview. This is for maths at Oxford. The white sections for students who were interviewed but didn't get an offer, and the grey for students who did get an offer. And what you can see is that as the admissions test score goes up, your chance of getting an interview go up fairly smoothly to the point where around 65, 66, you're very likely to get an interview with a score at that level, and at 75, you're pretty much guaranteed to get an interview. And we also see that only a very small number of students are getting offers down at the bottom end of the distribution, whereas at the top, you're looking at a point where more than 50% of those interviewed are getting offered places, and at the very top end, everyone who scores in the very, very top of the exam is getting the place. They'll be interviewing them as well, of course, but I can see why, if you're applying to study maths, being the best at the maths test probably has its advantages. So what this means in terms of sort of percentages is that, and we're looking at data from 2018 here, because the 2021 and the 2020 data is a little bit difficult because of the pandemic situation. Before you start the admissions test, you're going in with roughly a 12% chance of getting in. There's an average score of just under 51, but the average interviewee is getting a score of 67, and the average offer score is just under 73. So what you can see there is that those extra 2 or 3 marks, that may only be a couple of questions on the test, a couple of different parts of the answer, those are really noticeably increasing your chances, right up to the point that if you're scoring over 80, then you're all the way up to being odds on to get in, having gone into that exam at only a 12% chance of getting in. So the exam really is, it's not decisive. There are, as we see down here at the far left of the graph, students who are getting interviews and offers who have really found the test really difficult and have scored meaningfully below average. What we do know is those students are, they're going down a long way from that 12% that they went in with. And so you really want to be making sure that you're using the admissions test to boost your chances as much as you possibly can. So that sort of brings us to the end of the slides I wanted to look at today in terms of the insights. I think the things to sort of bear in mind here are that it's really much more important to pick the course than to pick the university. Spending extra time researching the course, the different options there are, the way it's assessed, all of those things are going to give you a much clearer idea of where you want to be and what you want to do than just picking on the basis of the university's location. In my experience, most students are happy with where they end up. It's the courses that tend to cause the trouble. Make sure that you're thinking about courses as well that aren't things that you've just studied at school. You don't want to be applying for maths when what you really care about is statistics. You don't want to be applying for history when what you really care about is politics. Make sure that you're aiming properly, and so you're taking a proper look at all of the different options you've got. Because if you don't know why you want to do the subject, if you're compromising a tiny bit, that's going to make it more difficult to put together a successful application. It's going to make the personal statement less convincing. It's going to mean you don't perform as well on the admissions tests. When you get to the interview, your passion isn't going to come through in the same way. And as much as everything else, you're not going to be as motivated. You want to make sure that you've really picked the subject that's right for you. And speaking of passion, make sure that passion is for the subject, not a passion for doing the Duke of Edinburgh or for school plays or for rugby. Those are all lovely things and delightful that you're interested in them, but they don't have a big impact on your application. So I would always say, if in doubt, leave them out of the personal statement. Don't worry about it. This isn't like the American system where you can get into Harvard so that you can do rowing or fencing. No one cares about any of that when it comes to Oxford or Cambridge. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Simone for a little bit to talk in more detail about the support that we offer at UniAdmissions. So Simone, tell me what we do.
Thank you so much. So it's our pleasure to support students who have all of the potential and the enthusiasm to do a standout application. And we support in the 4 following ways. So we have one-to-one tuition, which is a very important aspect of what we do. And, you know, with an expert in the subject and at the university, somebody who's gone to the university to study the same subject and who's also achieved in the top 10% for their own admissions process. They will hold your hand through the personal statement, through any relevant admissions tests, and also through the interviews. So really important. They can be very prescriptive with you. They can give you all of that advice because, you know, they've been there and they've done it. So yeah, really important. And also to give you that confidence to act as, you know, an academic partner, but also somebody who you can look up to and, you know, who can serve as a bit of a mentor to you along the journey. So one-to-one tuition, that's the first thing. The second thing that we offer are all of our materials, resources, guides and books. And, you know, we've pretty much gone to town on this and we've been really busy, you know, to provide you with lots of things that will be really useful in terms of, you know, wider reading and making sure that you are totally ready for your admissions tests, interviews and personal statements. Along with the resources, we also have theoretical academies attached to each admissions test. So you'll really get the opportunity to drill down into the content of the test, the specifications of the test, and eventually you'll be able to practice, even under timed constraints, under examined conditions, because we realize actually students, they find that whole process to be quite pressurizing. It's not that they couldn't pass the relevant test, it's just, you know, they have a very short window with which to do it. So we, you know, just really help them with best practice and make sure that they are prepared for that. Okay, we also do something called Enrichment Seminars, and these happen weekly, and they are effectively university level lectures. And, you know, they really increase your ability to think critically about the subject. So as Matt was saying, you know, sometimes you have very little exposure to a subject because you've not studied it before. You know, you can't study it at A level, it's not part of the GCSEs. And so this is a real opportunity to interact with the subject, but also to interact with other students who are doing the subject and, you know, to pick the brains of 2 experts as well. So it's like a handful of students and 2 lead tutors. So enrichment seminars invaluable. And lastly, we do something called extensive courses. So these are intensive courses. So these are like one-off workshops, and we have them before every main deadline that you have. So for instance, if you were wanting to study medicine, you would be probably sitting the BMAT and the UCAT, and you would have an intensive course for each. And it's, you know, it's just our way of making sure that you have retained the information we've given you, you know, that you've consolidated it to see if there are any gaps in your learning. If there are any gaps in your learning, we can fill those gaps in so that when you get to the real thing, you are settled within yourself and you know you can do a really, really excellent job. So yeah, day course is really invaluable as well. So that's the way in which we would support you, you know, give you that confidence that you are doing the best job that you could possibly do, and that you are going to stand out, you know, that we're going to elevate you above the cohort, and that the top universities will find you irresistible. Matt.
Simone. The good news is that all of this seems to work. We're really proud of our success rates. And most of all, we're proud that they compare really flatteringly with some of the top schools in the country. We don't have quite as snazzy outfits as Eton, but we do just as good a job, if not better, at getting students into Oxford, which is something nice. We've talked a lot today about the importance of passion, and that's something that we take really seriously when we're thinking about which students to work with. we would much rather be working with students who have the right attitude, who are passionate, who want to work with us, who want to work with their tutors. That matters much more to us than students having the very best grades. So if you are worried that you've got not enough 9s, that you're a bit of a 7 and 8 student, that you haven't been predicted straight A stars, that's fine. The very top universities are much more about passion and dedication than they are about having scored the very top marks. It can be it's much easier to change the marks than it is to change the person. Essentially, we would much rather have someone who is motivated, who we can improve, than someone who is performing better at the moment but is a little lazier, a little harder to work with. And so if you're in any doubt on that front, please do get in touch with us. If you've enjoyed this webinar, which I hope you have, I have, please say something nice about us on Trustpilot. You can read a whole range of reviews of our services there, and I always recommend that as being the best place to go to find out about the outcomes we have and the feedback we get. I don't want to excerpt anything here for you from that, because you can go and look at them on site, but please do say something nice about me in particular. Please, I think that'll be nice. You can also listen to our founder Rohan and my colleague Will's podcast. They talk about a lot of the same topics we've dealt with today, as well as some more fun ones. You can find that through our website, and I imagine through a whole range of podcast platforms as well. So what we're going to do now is, for 10 minutes or so, we're going to take some questions. So do please pop those into the Q&A section on Zoom, and we'll start working through those now. Now, what I'll be doing is we'll be focusing on any questions that come through that are fairly general. If you have questions that are very specific to you, that's wonderful. We would like to answer them, but it may well be that they need more time, more attention than we're able to offer in this format. So please do book a consultation with us. Hopefully the animation is showing you how to go about that. And that gives you the chance to have a conversation with Simone, with Rohan, with Will, with any one of our colleagues, who'll be able to give you a sense of how we can help, and really get to know you a little bit better and figure out what kind of support we can offer. The consultations are always free. There's no commitment associated with it. If nothing else, we just want to get to know you and figure out how we can help. And sometimes we can't. Not everyone is right for us. We're not right for everyone. So we're not expecting everything to be a perfect fit. We want to have that conversation first to make sure. It's a little bit like a first date in that respect. We're not guaranteeing it'll last forever, but it's certainly worth a try. So Christine asks, is English more competitive than English with modern languages? So I believe this is a course at Oxford. Now, my recollection is that the joint honours courses at Oxford tend to be a little bit undersubscribed. And so they tend to be a little bit less competitive than the straightforward subjects. This goes in with our sort of discussion of things at A-level as well. It can often be that the subjects that are the same name as an A-level subject are a little bit more popular simply because people know what they are, whereas the joint honours courses, people are less familiar with them, and that means that there's a little bit less competition for them. It does, however, mean that there are many fewer places. So I'm having a look here. In the last year, I have data for 26% of students who applied for English and modern languages got a place. And for English literature, it was 28%. So I was wrong. But those aren't huge differences. You're not going to notice the difference of 2% in your application. That's kind of a rounding error. So I wouldn't worry about it either way. Think about which subject you really want to do. Is the intersection of English and Russian the thing you really care about? Or is it English in general? Is it the year abroad that you're particularly excited about? Figure out the motivation first. That's always the key thing to do. Noreen asks about medicine, Oxford or Cambridge. So the UCAT and BMAT are really different to each other. If you're in year 12, Noreen, what I would suggest actually is and this is something we recommend to a lot of students, I think, Simone, is to do the UCAT and the BMAT this year as well as next year. Yeah, so the UCAT particularly is quite a weird exam. It's very cognitively focused, so it isn't as much about knowledge as it is about styles of thinking. The UCAT dates, I believe, start next month. So what I would recommend is go onto the UCAT website, register to take the UCAT, give it a go this year. You know, you don't have to do well, but you'll have given it a go. You'll have a sense of what the exam is like. Do the same thing for the BMAT in the autumn. Get a sense of what both the exams are like and start your revision for next year from there. The BMAT is a much more normal exam than the UCAT. It's a mix of verbal and numerical reasoning questions and then some science stuff. There's a little essay, but it's worth, I say, the most valuable thing you can do is give them a go. If you're planning a year ahead, go and giving it a try this year. Doing really badly, but having a much clearer sense of what's going on will do you the world of good. And as far as Oxford or Cambridge have more places. Oxford interview fewer people. So as we said up front, it's all to do with whether you are really confident in your BMAT results or not so confident. But it's something we can discuss with you as well, because we have a really good set of medical tutors, like loads of them. So that really is our sort of specialism. It's something we can really help with. And Tariq asks about the weighting and the pie charts. Can you talk a little bit about that, Simone?
Of course, yes, indeed. So the breakdown is 10% for the personal statement, and then you've got your academics which follow. So GCSEs and A-levels make up also 10% of the overall outcome. And then the admissions tests is 40%, and the interviews are also 40%. So we're finding that the weighting has become different now. Academics used to make up for about 30% a couple of years ago. That's really shifted because of the knock-on effect of the pandemic. But yeah, 10%, 10%, 40 and 40.
Yeah. Whether these things will shift back in the future is, of course, hard for us to know. Believe it or not, they don't ask me when they're deciding these things. And this is based on information we get direct from the university through the Freedom of Information Act. So I would not be shocked if the weight of A-levels and GCSEs went back up again in the future. I think that would probably be relatively normal, but it is hard to anticipate, and it also depends on how the trends in marking there go. One thing I think that is a possibility is that we'll get some kind of A double star or A sun or some kind of grade above an A star in the next few years for A-levels, and so that would change things as well. The same thing is very visibly on the cards for the GCSEs. I can't imagine that they decided to mark them from 1 to 9 without having thought that they might one day need a 10. So it's hard to anticipate, but certainly it's something we'll be keeping an eye on. And I expect that if traditional in-person exams do come back, then that will be, they'll have more emphasis on them. But as we talk about, because of the pandemic, the admissions test has become more important because it's the only test that all the students applying have done. Now, that was always the case to a certain extent with the IB and students applying from abroad, but the way A-levels have gone over the last couple of years has really complicated things, and that's no one's fault. And I don't think it has led to any particularly weird outcomes in terms of offers or places. It just makes the job of the universities harder, but they're smart people, so they can cope with it. Sally has a question about natural science. If you can take that, if you have a look at that for me, Simone.
Will do. Do you need to choose all your options on application? So it's my understanding that you get the opportunity to do all of the sciences. So you don't have to pick a specialism up front. And I think you do that for, is it a couple of years, Matt? And then in the third year, you have to kind of choose specifically, okay, I want to go in this direction from this point onwards.
Yeah, that's my understanding. But these things may have changed subtly since I last looked. So always worth checking with the universities themselves to be on the safe side. The thing to bear in mind with natural sciences, though, is although you won't be necessarily picking what components you want to do before you start, you do have a complete set of choices on the admissions test as to whether you want to do. God, there are lots of different parts. It's a really complicated test. There are, there are 7 parts to choose from, and you do 3. And so that's a mix of maths. I think in the first section, everyone does a certain amount of maths, and then you get a choice of biology, chemistry, and physics. And then in the second section, you get a choice of biology, chemistry, and physics again. So if you want to mix it up, then obviously that's an option. But you have choices in that test, which I imagine will inform what you're planning to do when you get there. But it's worth taking these things with an open mind. It may turn out that you decide that you lose interest in biology and want to become a chemist. Who knows? I feel I've been doing a lot of marketing for chemistry this week, a subject that I was absolutely dreadful at. I haven't done any chemistry since I failed since I failed GCSE science in probably before some of you were born, which is always a horrifying thought. Now I think that's all we have for questions so far. So I think what we'll do is we'll sneak off early and enjoy the wonderful weather. If you have any other queries, please do book a consultation. We'll be able to go through all of your questions in more detail there. Particularly those of you who have spoken to us, Christine, Tariq, Noreen, Sally, please do get in touch directly so that we can continue the conversation, have a clearer sense of how we can support you. Particularly anyone applying for a humanities course, I'm always keen to hear from. There aren't enough of us, if you ask me. We'll join you again next week when we'll be talking about applying to study medicine. And I'll be talking in more detail about the UCAT once I have done some extra research, because it is a complicated exam with a complicated marking scheme. So that's going to keep me busy next week, doing what I love, which is Microsoft Excel. So I'll see you then. I don't think it's you next week, Simone, but it's been lovely to catch up with you.
Thanks so much, Matt, for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we'll see you next week or not, depending on whether you're interested in becoming a doctor or not.